Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's probably going to be a little bit of a slow winding up process as we get going after relaxing and sitting outside in what was probably one of the nicest afternoons in Cayman in a very long time. Certainly after lunch isn't the best time to get everyone going, but we'll try to keep it very interactive. We'll try to make the session informative, as we hope the day has been so far. And I think what we'll go ahead and do is just jump straight into the introductions of the panel. And I'd like to ask the panel to introduce themselves. And if we could just start with Malcolm, and just introduce yourselves, what company or organization you're representing, and maybe just a couple of lines on what your background is in regards to data and communications and IT and that sort of infrastructure.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. My name is Malcolm Ellis. Originally from Canada. I moved to the Cayman Islands 20 years ago. Was originally manager of IT for the Health Services Authority. Helped implement their organization-wide patient information system. About 9 years ago, I formed Delphi Limited in partnership with the Phoenix Group of companies. We now provide outsourced IT management services for local businesses. So that's my background, about 30 years of IT altogether, and here today really to represent the needs of local businesses with respect to data and telecommunications here on the island, and hopefully offer that perspective amongst this group of panelists today.
Thank you. Dave?
Hi, I'm Dave Archbold. I'm the Managing Director of the ICTA, Information Communications Technology Authority. Before that, I worked for government. I was Manager of Computer Services and then the Director of the IT Strategy Unit. So I've been on Cayman for about the same 20 years as this guy next to me.
That's
In fact, we both were sort of founding members, I think, of the Cayman Islands Computer Society.
That's right.
A long time ago.
Exactly.
Prior to that, I worked for BP, and before that, I was in the Royal Air Force for 26 odd years. So that's my background. Bob.
Thanks, Dave. Bob Taylor. I'm the new CEO at Westar. Previously, I had been in the Bell system, AT&T, as well as companies such as MCI. I ran the telecommunications system in the U.S. territory of Guam, and most recently oversaw the broadband stimulus spending that President Obama did throughout much of the United States. And have been on the boards of a number of international telephone companies.
Hi, I'm Chris Heyman. I'm sort of in very good company here. I usually say I'm a telecoms lifer and it's unique, but now it's not. Everybody's been here. I've been in telecom since I finished my degree course. Worked across the globe with different organizations, mainly in business development and merger and acquisitions. And recently, 8 years ago, joined Digicel in Jamaica. And I've moved up from Trinidad, just moved to Cayman from May this year. So everything I say in the context is going to be as an outsider looking in, and observations about where I've worked previously and how Cayman sort of reflects those views or developments that I would see that was relevant to our industry.
Good afternoon. My voice is going. Good afternoon. Tony Rich, General Manager for Lime. I've been in the industry for some 28 years. Unlike some of these great stories here, I certainly I've only had one employer, and I've been with Cayman Wireless from 1984. I've spent quite a bit of time in engineering and also in product management for mobile services, broadband services, voice services. And today, of course, I'm looking forward to the interesting debate here and discussion with you, of course, as the moderator and, of course, you, the audience.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just to make sure, can everyone hear? Everything's been said? Okay, great. I think you'll realize that we've got quite an extensive panel here. Sounds as though these gentlemen have been involved in telecom since Jesus was a child. So hopefully we'll be able to get some valuable insight on telcos in the jurisdiction. And another thing that's caught me here out of interest is the the experience not only in telecoms, but across multiple jurisdictions. I think we've got, sounds like we've got an Irish accent, an American, a Caymanian, a Canadian, and a Brit. So that's quite a diverse panel we've got there on experience and nationalities, locations. I think before I pose the first question, I wanted to just read what got us here. You've heard a lot about the Future of Cayman Forum and the first one that we held about 2 years ago, and the driver groups that were established, and then the objectives that were identified by the various driver groups. And the one that's brought us to this session this afternoon is one of the actions of Objective B, which is investing in critical infrastructure. And that was to support public and private efforts to continuously improve wired and wireless communication networks in the Cayman Islands to match or exceed the highest global standards for speed and reliability. So I think what I'll do is I'll start off, I'll pose a question. Chris asked whether we were going to do this in numerical order or start from left to right, so I took that as him volunteering to field the first question. So I guess, gentlemen, and we'll start with Chris, in your perspective, how much collaboration would you say currently exists between the licensed providers of data and communication services in the Cayman Islands?
Well, I think if I had to look at what Digicel do with its competitors, it's the right amount. I think there's been a breakup of technologies into maybe mobile, into data, into voice services, and those have been pillars that have been separated. So up until now, we've been able to get away with individually building networks to fulfill the consumer needs. But I think as we go forward, there's got to be far more integration in those types of technologies. So we're already seeing, I mean, even 15 years ago, we talked about fixed mobile convergence, and so there was a need to share, but what that turned out to be from a voice-centric world was fixed mobile replacement. And we saw a massive growth in voice technology, mobile voice technology, but we're probably in a second phase of that now, which is about data. And it's whether the data infrastructure is going to be a fixed infrastructure or a mobile infrastructure, and the need to collaborate in both of those. I don't think players are going to successfully be able to do everything, because on top of that you've got your sort of transport mechanic, you've got your service mechanic, and now the application layer, and we're already seeing fragmentation between those layers. So I think there's going to be a lot more collaboration in the industry and coalitions in infrastructure and service sharing.
Great. So that might lead to not all 5 providers digging up West Bay Road at the same time.
Well, it's an interesting, sorry, with Bob sat beside me, it's an interesting, we've got a service provider with trenchless technology being right beside somebody with trench technology actually digging the road up 4 yards apart. So I think there's got to be a lot more collaboration, and I think that really comes back down to the planning. And if there's a need for a national plan, it's actually to lay a framework of implementation and then leave the competition to see how it's actually going to best share that. But at the sort of national plan level, it has to be the framework that's put in place about how we do this more sensibly, but not necessarily an investment or co-shared in infrastructure.
Great. Tony, I guess as the existing provider here for so many years as Cayman Wireless, there might be some desire to be somewhat defensive about competition coming in. So what's your feeling and your organization's feeling on the current collaboration between the competitors?
I think I agree with Chris in terms of where we're at. I think it's as the markets mature, and ours is, I would argue, a maturing market, we will find that operators are going to spend a bit more time collaborating, and we're going to end up, if not through forums like this, end up at some stage where we're going to have to take a closer look at more infrastructure sharing. So today I think we're at the right place and we are progressing at a decent rate. If we look at our market, I think compared to some others in the Caribbean, we've, I guess with the help of Dave and others in the authority, we've progressed at a fairly fast pace. Examples, of course, we can look at here are things like today we already share our mobile towers. We already have some infrastructure sharing whereby competitors can access our ducts below the ground, for example. And there's more, of course, that is being investigated and that can be done. I believe that as time goes by, it's going to move from just basically sharing what we call the passive aspects of the network, which are more like, of course, the property, having this bit of space on towers, for example, and getting access to other facilities to where it's more active sharing. And I think that integration is going to take some time, but with regards to how our business sees it today, clearly There's always the risk of incumbents backing up rather slowly, as in, yeah, we'll do it if we absolutely have to. And it's something that more and more we're accelerating and of course embracing. So what we know is that operators, in some cases, incumbents I should say, have done very well from actually opening up their networks, giving access to networks, in some cases commanding revenue streams of some 15 to 20% as a result of allowing new entrants into their networks and deriving decent revenue streams from that. So I think it's a case of how quickly we move. Today I think Cayman is progressing rather well, and hoping that in terms of the national sort of development that we're hoping to eliminate from discussions like this, we'll get to the stage where we're not going to be creating, as it were, cumbersome sort of developments along our highways and other parts of the island, whereby we haven't thought it through properly, and we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 operators perhaps in the fixed, in the mobile space, just all clamoring for the same very small, bit of real estate. So I'm hoping that through a decent plan we'll see even better progression. But today I think we're in a great place.
Thank you. I think just before I move to the regulation and private side, and I guess bear with Bob, you've only been in the seat for a couple of weeks now. So your first impressions and I guess what are the impressions that have been passed on by the team that your management team that you're with in regards to collaboration between the companies?
Well, I've been down here about 2 months now, and have already had folks approach me about collaborating. So I think there's a good, healthy environment where it makes commercial sense, where companies can complement each other. We looked at, when we looked from the outside at the opportunity here, quite frankly, there was no better opportunity, almost anywhere in the world with a first-class economy like the Caymans has, and then delivering a new fiber-based infrastructure. So, we think that as the technology grows and the infrastructure advances amongst all the carriers, there's going to be a whole change in the business environment and the way people think and do business here.
Thank you. Malcolm?
Yeah, well, I think from the perspective of the consumer, the businesses here locally are looking for, as you pointed out, faster and more reliable internet service. I might add low cost to that. When you look at the growth of networks in the United States and what's being offered there in terms of speed and cost, it's opened the door towards cloud computing more than ever, and that's becoming increasingly the norm in the United States, and obviously there's interest in cloud computing globally. But when you look at the cost of an internet connection and the speed currently being offered, not to knock any of the providers, you've done a great job in improving over the years. Currently it's a couple $100 a month to buy your 4, 6, 8 meg. Currently in the United States, $80 will get you 75. 200 will get you 150 meg down. So the numbers are significantly different. As companies globally look around for offshore centers to relocate, they're coming in with their expectations of what's going to be available and how much it's going to cost. And if we don't remain competitive with other offshore jurisdictions in this area, I think we're going to suffer. So I think collaboration amongst our competitors, because no one can afford to do it alone, is going to be vital to getting us where we need to be in that respect.
Thanks, David.
You mean I'm going to have the opportunity to speak last?
Yeah. This
The
time.
regulator never gets to speak last.
You just volunteered to be first next.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to sort of endorse something that the licensees have said, that there is pretty good cooperation here and has been, I think, right from the outset, from the beginning of liberalisation here. And I would particularly like to sort of compliment Lime and the approach that they took at the outset, which allowed us to develop very quickly. I think it's gone well. We do have a legislative framework, in fact, a regulatory framework for the sharing of infrastructure. So there is a laid-down procedure that has to be followed, and if there are problems or issues, they get referred to the authority, and the authority has to act like Solomon and pass its judgment. That too has worked reasonably well, I think, over the years, and it's helped. Technology has moved on, and I think one of the issues we're finding now is more and more there's the deployment of fiber optic networks and a number of licensees looking at providing fiber to the home, which is great development for all the residents on Cayman, but inevitably does lead into issues of digging up roads, hanging on poles, et cetera. And whereas in the past we have worked quite closely with, for example, planning as far as sharing of towers is concerned and construction of towers. We haven't worked with the NRA before, and I think that's something that we're going to have to do probably more and more in the future. So that's where I see it at the moment.
Great. It's encouraging that the regulatory authority thinks there's some collaboration. I guess that probably leads me into another question, not being over technical myself, but everything comes in and out of the island somehow. Other than the odd ganja plant around, there's not much that grows here. When we start putting in fiber and we start increasing rates, et cetera, at what point does the country become sort of the bottlenecked in regards to the transmission of data on and off of the island in regards to, I think I'm correct in saying what's referred to as the Maya 1 cable? How much capacity is on there? Where are we? And is there going to need to be any sort of look towards the dropping of a new cable or connecting us to other jurisdictions? Who wants to jump in on that one?
Go ahead.
I'll start first. So with regards to the actual capacity out of Cayman, clearly we have two cable systems today, the Maya 1 cable system, and of course the Cayman Jamaica fiber system going in an opposite direction. So what we know is that in the Maya system, it was, of course, it's a huge system today owned by a consortium, and we're going through, I think at this stage we're going through our fourth upgrade since we actually installed the system, and I think that's probably quadrupling the initial capacity, and the capacity really is limited to the terminal equipment on the end when you're thinking about the optical fiber connection in between. So as a medium, there's really no limit per se as to what we think we'll be able to put over Maya. Today, I think we're looking at an upgrade that's going to do at least 4 times the capacity that we initially designed it with, and it's capable of course, doing even more in the future. So we don't have a capacity issue on the Maya 1 system, and of course on the Cayman Jamaica fiber system, we're about to conduct another upgrade there as well. And again, this is really about long-term planning and putting in place upgrades that we know are capable of doing another 4 years, another 5 years, another 10 years. And I don't foresee a bottleneck. What I think we need to be very clear about is that when we're actually planning, going through the planning stages as operators ourselves, that on the wholesale side of our business is that we're also trying to get those demand forecasts that speak to, well, what does Digicel see as the capacity needs for the next 5 years? What do we see in terms of West Star? If we're going to look at huge demands there and trying to make sure we're incorporating those into our growth plans. So we try to avoid, as we make the investment to upgrade these systems, we try to avoid the possibility of having maybe some major shift take place in terms of demand for capacity that simply isn't there because we haven't made the investment. So I believe today there are no limitations in terms of what we can do in those systems. The fact that we're now in the process of conducting two major upgrades once again would say to me that we should not have any problems in the next 10 years, and or 5 years I would say, it's moving a lot faster now. And if we have to make upgrades, we'll continue to do so. So today there's no bottleneck, and I believe that in terms of the limitations, there are no limitations really on the fiber optical network. It's really about the terminal equipment and how much more we're trying to derive in terms of bandwidth from those systems.
The other thing, and Tony's right, I don't think we'll run out of bandwidth on the undersea cables. As the ISP market in Cayman matures, passing traffic between, say, West Star and Lime in Cayman rather than in Miami will save a tremendous amount of bandwidth. Where today a West Star customer who needs to hit a server that's attached to the Lime network literally goes to Miami, hits effectively the Lime connection, comes back from that way and uses up sort of 2 legs of that undersea bandwidth. If we get to the point where we pass that traffic off here in Georgetown, that's sort of two legs of that bandwidth that doesn't get used and gets used available for somebody else. So there's a number of different ways that you can take advantage of the technology to both add capacity actually and add capacity more from a logical standpoint.
I absolutely agree, though I don't think the benefits immediately will be quite as much as some people perhaps think, because many companies have servers, Cayman companies have servers that are currently in the US. So in fact, it's not going from Cayman to Cayman directly in many cases. It's going via a server in the US, so you're not going to save the traffic in those situations. But I would very much agree, and the authority has long looked to try and get an IP exchange set up here. It's just a question of who's going to do it, where's the money going to come from, etc. And also tied in with that, I would very much like to see a mirror of what's called the root servers, which are the internet root servers. It would be probably an F server held in Cayman, because that too would reduce traffic. Because every time you look up an address, it would just look up locally rather than having to go off to a root server somewhere else. And secondly, it would provide a level of resilience that business could continue, at least within Cayman. You know, if there was a catastrophic break of Maya 1, for example, Cayman could continue operating independently without having to go down Maya 1. Yeah. I also agree with the others that there's not much chance that we're actually going to run out of capacity on Maya 1. But that's not to say is that I wouldn't love to see a third cable for one, competition reasons, and two, resilience reasons. Problem with that is we've talked to various companies who have come in looking at providing something like that. And they say, well, what we're looking for is commitment to the bandwidth, first of all. And you end up in, you know, a chicken and egg situation. You then have companies that say, well, we would love to come in and do lots of computing work on Cayman, but we need the bandwidth. And so it goes on. And you've got to break into it. And,
yeah, I mean, I think I've got three views and probably a slight divergence of views in two of them. On David's point about the investment in a third cable, if you look at the last 10 years, the costs have been roughly the same to lay a cable. You're still employing the boats and they're dredging a cable, but the price of the bandwidth that's been sold over those has dropped to 10% of what it was before. So you've gone from your cost base staying the same. I know you can say there's an increased capacity, but if listening to
Tony.
Sorry, just saying about the capacity, you were saying that we're doubling or quadrupling the capacity on the fiber cable, but if we look at our customers, that's increasing by 10 times.
Indeed.
So we're going from somebody who's saying an 8 megabit service to an 80 megabit service or 100 megabits. Mm-hmm. So there's a dynamic there that puts, I'm not saying there's a problem today, but there's a risk that if the technology for the endpoints does not keep up with this explosive growth, you're going to end up with a constricted cable that will not allow you the growth that you need. So I don't think there's a problem in the next 2 or 3 years. I think there was 80 gigabits put on the Maya, but the other problem we have is they're shared spurs. So they actually come off main link cables into South America or Central America or through the Jamaica and down through the Caribbean. So you're sharing and contending a bandwidth on a spur cable. And the difference that if we try to get a third cable is we've either got to come off Arcos or Columbus and try and then dredge to Cayman. So you got a bit of a problem on if the Arcos or the owners do not see the potential in Cayman. There's nobody who could afford, I don't believe, to start laying a cable all the way to Miami off from the Cayman Islands. I think there's something like $50,000 a kilometer for that infrastructure build out. And it's a big risk. And we've long gone past the days with that cost dynamic where we say your costs are the same, but your retail pricing has dropped to 10% of what it was, that you do speculative build out. I can quite understand the fiber guy saying, show me the money and I will build the cable. They are not going to come to us and go, if we put a cable in there, could you fill it? We're well past those days. And I think the international fiber operators, it's a consortia usually. I know Cable and Wireless, 17 people in Maya. And if you think that Verizon are not prepared to build that cable on their own, you know, there's very few people in the Caribbean region that can afford to stump up the sort of money that's needed for submarine cable. So I think there's a risk. I don't think it's near term, and I think if the technology on the fiber multiplexing improves, then that risk is mitigated. But we do have a problem that if that the demand that businesses are asking us for continues and grows exponentially, and you're starting. It's not really about our area, because you're then into the financial services of Singapore, or, you know, can you compete with those guys, or even the US? And when we make price comparisons, a 250 million people market against 55,000, it's very hard to make that cost dynamic transpose the pricing that we expect here. We love the service, we love the speeds of the US, but then we're trying to transpose that to a small island economy where the cost dynamics do not match the volume sell.
I think in terms of you know, the whole issue of whether we bring a third cable in, I believe that clearly that's something that has been obviously presented by a number of parties, and that option is always there. But clearly, as Chris pointed out, in terms of the actual cost of investment today compared to what you're getting in by way of return, that has changed, you know, tremendously. When we look at the data growth in particular, we speak about the explosive growth in mobile data. That's just one example, and that's happened as a phenomenon, I'd say, across the world in the last 5 years. And what we're seeing today in terms of, you know, over-the-top services such as television, clearly, I think, going back to my earlier point, it calls for even greater collaboration. If we were to assume that it's not impossible, but unlikely, that we're going to have a third system coming into the country within the next 5 to 10 years, then it really, I guess, calls for us to be a bit more open and share more on the wholesale side of our business about what do we foresee in terms of, if not necessarily getting down to the granularity of services, in terms of demand by way of capacity that allow us to, as it were, make the right levels of investment now in those two existing systems, so that we can have a Cayman that's actually poised for, you know, ongoing economic growth. So I believe we can make a lot better use of what we have, and we can plan a lot more, and we can reveal it more to each other that allow us to make bigger investments and push our consortiums harder, where we have in Maya, for example, to make sure that Cayman's got its fair share. And with regards to pricing, I just want to say that I guess one of the great things about competition is it forces us, regardless whether you're an owner of a system or you're part owner of a system, or you feel as though you've still got some sort of power as a monopoly, is that it forces us to get a lot more competitive. So an example of that is on the Maya system. While one might argue, well, you know, Lime and Cable Wireless has the ability to hold its prices high. Well, we've got many other owners there. You've got AT&T, you've got Verizon, you've got, you know, Sprint, the list goes on and on and on. And it's super competitive. So what's great about that is that while we as in Cable Wireless may want to maybe hang on to those revenue streams of old, those prices of old, you know, the truth is new entrants really don't care necessarily about the investment that was made and what it costs. When you look at the competitive lay of the land, if the prices of bandwidth or the prices for you know, for an STM1 or a 45 megabit circuit or whatever you're buying is now a tenth of what it costs when we install a system, then that all just fades away rather quickly. And I think we're in like I said, a super competitive environment on those systems, to the point that prices, of course, are going to continue to fall. So it makes it much easier, of course, for new entrants to actually acquire capacity. And hopefully, like I said, with longer term planning, it makes for a better business case in terms of how much more we should invest, how much more we should push our consortiums and other members in terms of ownership on those systems.
I think, Stuart, a great example of this is, you know, as you look at the types of speeds that you can get today, the network that we're putting to everybody's house will be able to deliver at least 100 megabits to every home, unshared. To businesses, it'll be over a gigabit. So it's a dramatic change in what companies can have and homes can have versus what they have today, and that just opens up, you know, a whole set of new opportunities and new capabilities that, you know, and new business options where businesses that have servers overseas in the US could bring them back here and get a network that's more advanced than any network in the United States, more reliable than any network in the United States, with, you know, right here in the Cayman.
Malcolm, have you got that?
Well, point taken regarding the population. First of all, clearly we're not in the same market as the U.S., and I think that kind of brings us back to the discussion earlier about collaboration and perhaps to what extent a national data infrastructure plan might help facilitate that. We all recognize that with 2 or 3 or 5 companies providing similar services. We don't want everyone rebuilding exactly the same thing, nor is it cost effective. But if there were a more national plan and framework that could incorporate private enterprise taking on portions of it, do we see that as a way of reducing cost and delivering not the same but closer to what the U.S. market is getting today? I'm asking a question, not answering one. But
I think from a U.S. perspective, as being part of, or previously part of President Obama's national broadband plan, the problem with plans like that in the United States are they set the bar very low. You tend to get the least common denominator, not the best. Where, you know, if you're looking at what's the state of the art in services in the United States today, it's by companies that are doing almost the opposite of the national broadband plan, the gigabit use, the Googles and others, whereas you know, I think a competition, as well as there is a need for guidance and a gentle hand from the regulator, as well as some goals and objectives. And I think all of that can be accomplished. The problem, at least from the U.S. perspective, has been a national plan doesn't deliver the best. It delivers a common okay.
the point taken about, mentioned about avoiding offshore routing between carriers, I took a lot of interest in that because personally we've had a situation where one of our clients, who will remain nameless, moved part of their office across the parking lot and were remotely accessing their servers literally 40 feet away, but by virtue of a different ISP, we're going by way of Miami. And we eventually had to change, you know, the provider at one end or the other. Again, naming no names, but to solve that issue. So I think if that kind of collaboration, whether it needs to be kind of mandated under a regulatory authority directive, if it's not in your best interest, would certainly be in the best interest of the market. So if that's something you think you would do on your own, it would certainly be welcome.
Can I take the opportunity to throw that back at you, Malcolm?
Sure.
I think as much of what is needed is the users to ask for it.
Right.
And make a noise about it.
Right.
You know, whether to us or to the press or to your providers. But unless that happens, nothing's going to happen.
No, agreed. Good point.
No, I think I just want to comment on that, I guess, the pricing in terms of the retail side of business. I think from an infrastructure standpoint, in terms of building a smart infrastructure, clearly I think there, as Chris pointed out, there are economies of scale. We're always concerned about those in terms of how do we stack up. What do we have to do by way of a business case in terms of a model to actually get a return on our investment, given some of our businesses in a way have very interested shareholders, should I say. It's always a balancing act between making a big investment, whether it's a 5 or 10 or 15 or $20 million investment, and of course getting to that point where you can say, okay, now we're actually going to start making a return on investment. What's the payback period? So I think for us here in Cayman, given a very small market, given the size of the market that we have, given the various dynamics that we have in terms of pressures from shareholders and other areas, it's always a dicey balancing act around, well, how hard can we push this investment? How much investment can we justify in Cayman? Cayman's a small place, it's a great little market, but how long is it going to take for us to get a return on this? Can we take this investment in terms of the opportunity cost and perhaps put it into another market? So I believe that while we can look at a number of prices in the data space in particular and compare others, but let's just stick with data for right now and say that our prices don't compare favorably to the US, I believe that from an investor standpoint, were we to actually look at the size of the investments we have to make here to actually provide those first world type services and be able to compare favorably in terms of prices, we'd be looking at payback periods that typically would not be necessarily acceptable to most of our businesses, and that's just one of the difficult things about the size of our market here. I think on the other end of that spectrum though, what we're seeing, as alluded to earlier on, is that more and more our services are becoming commoditized. So data, for example, really doesn't matter that much anymore in terms of where you get the data from. Customers are saying, well, it's going to be a 1 meg, 1 gig, whatever it is, and they want that at a price, and it's very much a commodity nowadays. So I believe that as we watch those those competing sort of forces in terms of one, the investment dollar, and where do we actually put it, and what's the payback going to look like, and what are the other interested stakeholders expecting to see at the end of it, and the local market, of course, the larger sort of global market. We get to the stage rather quickly whereby we're not going to be able to maintain some of the prices that we have now. So I think pricing pressures are immense, and if we go back just, I think, a few years, Mr. Archibald, and look at, say, broadband when Britain started here, and 6 to 4 kilobit circuit was a big thing, and people were paying probably $60 to $70 just to have that. And today, of course, that's the price that you're probably paying for an 8 meg service. And I would argue that within no more than probably a year, with some new entrants in the market here in the broadband space, you're going to see those prices plummet even more. So I believe that the market is essentially adjusting. The market forces are adjusting and taking care of itself, as it were, in terms of Cayman's prices have come down immensely, and they're going to continue to get driven down. So as fiber to the home is deployed, as we see services, of course, over the top, layered on fiber to the home, for example, whether it's security or TV or whatever the case, I believe that we're going to see a fairly rapid shift in terms of what consumers are going to be paying for what I would essentially term as the pipe, the connection to their homes. So hopefully businesses are going to see that, consumers are going to see that rather quickly. But I believe that as operators, there's always going to be this balancing act around, well, okay, how do we move from the existing revenue streams that we have today to the point where we actually still believe we have a sustainable model? And in some cases, we're simply not prepared or not capable to get into those areas. In other cases, it's really about getting the right level of investment, right type of infrastructure, having a decent plan, and arguably I would say diversifying. And sometimes that diversification, going back to your first question, is about perhaps making greater use of your existing infrastructure as opposed to maybe trying to be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. An example of that, of course, is in the other half of our business that we sold to Vodafone, now Cable Wireless Worldwide. Our business is communications, Cable Wireless Communications. A significant percentage of our business was actually made in the wholesale arena. So it wasn't a case of just trying to be everything to everyone. It was very focused, and a significant percentage of revenue streams was from the actual wholesale side. So I believe that the issue of prices and trying to be more like the US and Europe and other places like that, that's rapidly dissipating. You see it in mobile data space. We see it, of course, in voice rates. And I think perhaps more so than anywhere else, data prices are just having to come down rather quickly. So it's happening.
I just have a closing point, Stuart. I mean, one of the things with Digicel as well is that where we've seen a commercial opportunity to build infrastructure, which is not our core, we've gone ahead and done it if there's not other people stepping up to the plate. So although we see the demand, if we found there was no consortia to actually build this, we would be looking at whether we would do it ourselves. We've done opportunities in Haiti, etc., where nobody else actually sees the opportunity that we are experiencing there. So we've have a massive business growth in Haiti. We're over 3 million customers there, and we also saw that the next stage of Haiti's growth is going to come from data, but there's not many people who see the opportunity in Haiti. So we've gone ahead and built the international subsea fiber ourselves and laid that. And obviously, Cayman's a much richer opportunity as this grows. So if we saw no other consortia stepping in, it would be something that we would be considering ourselves.
I think that probably is a good segue into a slightly different topic in regards to our current infrastructure. We make reference in the objective to match or exceed highest global standards for speed and reliability. And I guess I'll probably start with you, Bob, as the freshest eyes in the market. Where do you think Cayman rates in regards to perhaps other jurisdictions in the Caribbean, perhaps, in regards to its telecommunications infrastructure, and is it meeting the needs of perhaps some of our larger global clients that are domiciled here? Is it acceptable? Is it good? Is it advanced? Comparatively speaking to some of our neighbors.
Well, I think there's two aspects of that. Is comparing ourselves to other Caribbean nations the right comparison when you look at the global financial market that exists here in Cayman, and if not, should we be comparing ourselves to the rest of the world, Europe, U.S., Canada, and we think as we looked at the network that we wanted to put in place. We looked at the customers that were here, the people that live here, And we think that in 5 years, the Cayman Islands will have the most advanced communications network in the world, bar none. And that's an important aspect of infrastructure as much as water and electricity and roads are. And if you look at what the economy is driven by here, it's a global business economy. And we think that the communications infrastructure needs to be of a global standard.
Yeah, I think just on the globalization, I think the infrastructure, the base level infrastructure is fairly sound in Cayman. The access is also there on the international front, but what we've recently moved some of the services is global wide area networks. We're finding that a lot of customers are coming to us who have premises in Hong Kong, UK, some of the other offshore, and it's not really about the underlying transport anymore, it's about the layered services that are put on top of those. And I think that's probably an area that has been slightly lacking in Cayman, and we're focusing on developing a range of services that now bring first world managed services to the island. So it's not really the underlying transport anymore, it's about the layers of services that are sat on top of that, and we're seeing good growth in those services. So I think we're well positioned. I think the teams and the companies here are seeing the opportunities and bringing those services into the island as they occur.
I think one of the interesting dynamics, and I guess Chris and I feel this more than ever, is as mobile service operators and across the world, there's some phenomena taking place. And one of those is that, particularly for mobile service providers, today we look at the rate of growth in terms of revenues and compare that to the rate of expenditure in terms of what we're making by way of capital investments. And one interesting things that we're seeing is that with the fierce competition we have in the mobile space, and of course consumers, most of us are expecting to get a $600, $700 smartphone at no cost whatsoever. We're seeing that more and more mobile operators, in terms of their ability to find that as it were, those earnings to reinvest, is being squeezed increasingly, particularly in the mobile space. So that's something to consider around the level of subsidization that takes place today in the mobile arena and what's left in terms of earnings, because it's been impacted significantly to actually make investments. The second thing is that while we've seen that, across the world, shrinking of the economy and just, across Cayman as well, has been hitting us really hard ever since 2008. What we know is that in terms of our fixed costs, it's very difficult for telecom operators in particular to actually squeeze their costs much outside of staff costs. A lot of our costs are fixed, and it makes it very difficult. So I believe that we've got this cycle taking place of one, we want to make sure we've got the earnings to reinvest, but if we've got scarce resources in terms of capex, you're not getting that, and of course you're not investing, you're not getting the revenues. And I believe that while we're renowned for major investments, and we want to of course maintain that, what we're also going through right now, I believe, in most of our businesses is just a much more careful level of analysis that says, well, okay, are we doing the right thing? The other bit that, of course, comes into that, particularly for mobile operators, and Chris and I just, of course, have been through it, is around making an investment such as 3G. We're all delighted to say 3G, 4G, we've got that. And I look at, I guess, our Victor of Antigua, Victor Cochran, former CEO, and he just launched LTE. So then you have this discussion with your investors around, well, one, we've done the right thing for our countries. We've launched, the most modern technologies available a year and a half ago, at least one that we thought we'd be able to, was best suited to our country in the form of 4G. And before you can sort of, turn the last, screw on the optimization of that network, there's someone screaming, well, what about LTE? If it's not the authority, perhaps it's the customer base. And it's really a case too, when we speak of small markets like ours, where you've made between us probably $20 million worth of investment, and within 18 months, you're having to stop and scratch your head and think, well, the payback on that investment, of course, is years and years. So the dynamics, in particular with small markets like ours, and where we are absolutely intent on trying to provide first world service, does create a fair bit of challenge, not just at the local level, but at corporate level as well, around how much can you take, when can I see the return, and why should I reinvest now another $5, $10, $15, $20 million going to the next level. So we've always got that balancing act, and I think at least I feel in our business we've been very fortunate, and our industry, I think we've been quite good across the patch, I would argue, across most of the Caribbean, in actually staying fairly abreast of those cutting edge technologies. But clearly at the rate I think, importantly, the technologies are changing nowadays. It's going to become increasingly difficult, particularly in small markets. I think what you're going to see more of, when you speak about infrastructure and smart infrastructures, you're going to see more overlay type services, so that when we look at a service like LTE, long-term evolution, the next level of mobile, I think what you like to see is, rather than saying, like we were proud to say when we launched 4G, we're nationwide, it's much more likely you're going to see pockets where we think demand exists, where we think the most benefit can be derived, actually being overlaid with a new technology as opposed to the entire country, because I believe that the dynamics are much clearer now in terms of the rate the technology is moving at, the rate of return in terms of our investment, the return on investment payback periods, that we have to be a lot smarter, a lot more specific about how we deploy these technologies. I'd love to sit here and say, let's just have LTE across the entire country, let's just have fiber to the home across all of Grand Cayman, Karen Bracken, you know what, let's do it. The truth is today, in terms of one, the level of competition in the marketplace, is the rate of growth taking place, and the actual return on investment opportunity cost, given scarce resources, we have to be a lot smarter, and that may come with some challenges in terms of what consumers expect, what the regulators may expect, and what even governments may expect by way of universal access. But I think that that clearly is going to become a much more significant factor in the years to come around, being much more specific with our investments, where they go, where we think they're best suited.
Great. I'm getting mindful of time now, and I want to be able to open up for a couple of questions, but very briefly, Malcolm, if you could just touch on from the client's perspective, not the telco's perspective, the service provider's perspective, do you feel our infrastructure is of a good global standard?
Well, having been 20 years here and watched the evolution of data and telecommunications, I have to say we've certainly come a very long way. Congrats to our providers for getting us there. I think in IT, if you're standing still, you're moving backwards, however. And so it's something that we can't be complacent about. Yeah, I think we've been competitive, but I think we have to continue to move forward if we're ever going to remain competitive in this market.
Great. Will, you got the microphone. I'd like to put it out. We've got just a couple of minutes to field some questions from the floor. If we could put that out. I see Gary with his hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to twist it a little bit from the standpoint that I believe we're talking about infrastructure, and certainly there's policy and legislation to enable these things, and certainly pipe and bandwidth and cost of bandwidth is helpful. But have we thought about what it is we're trying to enable in the form of something that's good for the public of Cayman and for the businesses of Cayman? And we look at things like modernizing healthcare, telemedicine, the move to mobile money, all those kind of things. Is that part of the mandate in figuring out what all this bandwidth's going to do for you?
Yeah, well, I'll have a stab at that, because I think we are already launching services like mobile money. We've launched it in the South Pacific across Fiji, Vanuatu, Haiti are all big markets for us in mobile money. The bandwidth, as the Shetty Hospital comes on, my view is I don't think there's been a coordinated plan, and I think one of the questions I was posed is, do you think there should be a national plan for data and communications? And I put no initially. Now, it wasn't about, do we need the national plan for development of those services? Absolutely, we do. But do you do it in isolation, or do you do it as a part of a cluster development? And I know the UK at the moment is being used as a bit of a model of this, where I think for the first time, they've been planning for decades. For the first time, they've actually looked at what they can afford to do. I think with a downturn in the economy, it's always a great opportunity to review how you do things. I think the UK government has looked inwardly and said, we've probably 5,000 plans going on at the moment, and what can we realistically do? We can probably do 500 of those. So we stack rank every piece of activity on infrastructure build in the national plan, and then we give it a weighting, and we are going to give surety that the top 500 are going to get done, and we'll have a look at the others and see how we're going to do those. So I think as part of a national plan, we're not quite there yet, and that's something that definitely needs attention, because if we are going to build hospitals in the East End, if we are going to build schools in the East End, is there telecommunications infrastructure there to support those, and is there a vision of how that's going to look? And then do we move to the environment that you're saying about the Medicare and remote medicine, and is that a growth market for us? And actually, do we need to bring the specialist skills here, and do we need to develop those, or are they going to be served? And I don't think that vision has been or I haven't seen it. I've read quite a bit about what we're doing in national planning, but I haven't seen that vision element to say, even the aspirational where you separate the digital divide of city centres and rural. You know, a lot of people say, well, we're going to put a gigabyte to every home, which is completely impractical. But could those guys work with a megabyte service if they had it? And yes, they probably could, and we put gigabyte services in the dense urban areas. So that sort of vision I haven't seen here, and I absolutely agree that framework is the piece that we probably need to know over those 5 or 10 or 15 years. This is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to be. But I think more importantly for our government colleagues as well is that we actually execute it. Rather than do the planning cycle and we build the plan and the vision, it's the execution is going to make or break the countries. And I think one of the interesting things in Cayman is we're talking about it now, but probably some of the other markets have already been through this and are already executing. So we're probably slightly back on the back foot on a national planning piece, but it's not something I don't believe we can catch up fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think that was a great question about, you know, what are we going to do with all that bandwidth? And it actually reminded me of someone up here on an earlier panel describing our new airport being opened in the early 80s, and what on earth are we going to do with all this space? We've overfilled our airport. I think we're going to very quickly overfill our bandwidth if you provide it. If you build it, they will come. In the U.S. today, you know, cloud servers on demand. If I had a credit card and an iPad, I could have a server up and running in about a minute. Consolidation and commercialization of services will become the new norm. Businesses aren't going to work the way they are today. That's the way it's going to be globally. I think we need to be a part of that. I don't think the way business is being done today is going to be the way it is even 5 years from now. So yes, I think if you bring us the bandwidth, business will learn how to make it, to take advantage of it.
And to be fair as well, I think in terms of the you know, traditional telcos, we're always moving rather quickly as we can to get into the managed services space and probably to offer more direct competition to you. But I believe that today, if we had to take a look at where we are today, it would certainly call for even closer collaboration, perhaps not so much between the operators who are, you know, providing the core infrastructure, but more so with businesses like yours that are clearly in that, you know, IT/managed service space to be able to better articulate exactly how do we actually, you know, get that vertical growth if that's what we're seeking. Mm-hmm. So I believe clearly in a plan, but I believe that the expertise today doesn't necessarily reside as squarely in the telco space as it does in your arena. And I believe that with the right level of collaboration and regulation oversight, if that's needed, that we can certainly improve what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think, yeah, Graham, you got an interesting position, and one that I think needs to be mentioned, because as you say, if they build it, they'll charge for it. So you...
I thought he said they'd build it.
And if 3 of them build it, 3 of them will charge you for it.
Yes.
So.
Stuart, thank you. Graham Pearson. I was involved in the Bermuda telecoms market for a number of years, and we actually had a share in a telecoms company. We did very, very well during the heyday. And then we had other competitors come in. We all did exactly the same was happening in West Bay. We dug up the road, we all put our fiber in, we spent millions of dollars. We couldn't get the price down for the consumer. That was the issue for us. I mean, we desperately wanted a single provider of the infrastructure, wholesale it out. The service providers come along, they rent that at that price, and they provide their services on top of that, and the service providers at a competitive rate won the market. Unfortunately, Bermuda realized that too late. And if you look at Jamaica, 100 meg for $120. I'm getting 8 meg supposedly for $120. I actually get 4 if I'm lucky. Yeah. If you look at the GDP of this country compared to the Caribbean, we're the highest. I don't actually think we're that great on infrastructure. I think if you compare it to some of the islands, I think we're 3rd or 4th at best. And yet we position ourselves as being this you know, come to the island, e-commerce, etc. We absolutely have to fix it. I love to hear what you're saying, Bob, but my fear is what we don't want is a triple play provider coming in, spending the millions of dollars, cutting all the competitors out, and then jacking the prices up 12 months later. So there is a fear of that. I think that comes back to controls as well. Mm-hmm. But in terms of these cloud-based services, as you said, I'm in that business as well. Yes, we can provide services at $12 per user per month, but not if it's going to cost you, you know, $800 to get to it.
Exactly.
So it's not easy. I don't have the answers, but I'm just saying I certainly know what the pain points are. I've actually been through it financially the last 5 or 6 years. So it's interesting to see what happens, other than the fact it takes me longer to get home now on West Bay Road. But you're right. Seeing three fiber providers laying fiber on the same stretch of road, to me, just seems incredulous. But I suppose the question comes back then: how do we control that competitive element? You know, the guy with the biggest checkbook wins, and the consumer potentially loses.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a view on this, and I don't know if Bob wants to answer because it's probably more so. But there's an economic life cycle here, and I think if the regulatory framework allows 5, 6, 7, 8, I mean, we saw it in Dublin as well, 5, 6, 7 operators dig up the road, they will all do it. But what will happen is that'll all collapse, and you'll end up with 3 or 4 competitive players which actually have the ability to compete and bring the prices in. They may be a fire sale of the fiber assets, but somebody can then have low-cost bandwidth and then start to bring competition back to the market. I think there's an unfortunate hiatus in between where you have that multi-player market, but eventually it collapses down to a sustainable model. And I think we're probably moving to that in Cayman, would be my view.
Clearly, outside of I think in terms of bringing prices down, the best thing in terms of movement there is of competitive forces, whether it's on the international capacity, like I spoke to earlier on, or whether it's a new entrant coming into the market, such as Westar here and going to the fiber to the home. I believe that certainly competitive forces are the best way to drive prices down. So what we're going to see is we're going to see prices, of course, shifting over the next, like I said, fairly rapidly over the next couple of months and years. And again, getting back to the longer term planning, we rarely, with the odd customer or a company like yours, of course, we get into the, how can we afford to compete on the level of, say, US, UK, Canada. And we need to have more of these discussions that speak to, for my type of business where I'm renting this out on a, per unit, whatever those units are basis, it makes no economic sense for my business, for my client, who's accustomed to this in Switzerland or Guernsey, or wherever he is, to actually buy it at this price. And I believe that clearly in terms of stimulating economic growth, we ought to be in a position to better differentiate. It's probably the best word right now. Better differentiate the type of growth that we're trying to stimulate and trying to foster, so that we can, through a planned process, actually identify those growth areas that we can actually provide preferential pricing to. That's one way of doing it that actually starts, allows that growth to take place at a level that suits you, and also allows us as the operators a bit of time to actually find a way to adjust, as it were, in terms of other revenue streams, or just making sure we're very clear about what we're expecting to see over a period of time, and not just falling off a cliff in terms of what we derive as revenue. So I believe that adjustment can take place, and perhaps the discussion is not enough. It needs to be perhaps more specific to a certain segment of the IT world that we're, as a nation, trying to attract more of. So cloud services, hosted services, unit type purchases of capacity, whether it's, regardless of what it is. We know it's shifting quite rapidly, and I believe the direct dialogue and a plan of some sort to facilitate that, to encourage it, is what we need, and we'll have to back away a little faster, I think, than we back away right now in terms of those, better margin products that we have today. So it has to happen, but I think the dialogue is, and the candor is required.
Right. I think, and again, in the essence of time, could you just maybe take 30 seconds, David, and just kind of maybe explain from a regulatory perspective what, if anything, you're doing to insist, encourage, or force the providers to share infrastructure?
If we look at towers, we worked with planning to do that. So we worked with planning permission that actually controlled it, but we worked with them. And that worked well. The whole question of digging up roads, which I think is where most people are coming from at the moment. I think these providers are maybe getting a bad rap for some of it, because I think a lot of it isn't actually these guys that are digging up the roads. I think it's electricity and water, but that's beside the point. Some of the current trenching technologies really don't dig up the road very much at all. I have several thoughts about the whole question of number of cables, because I am concerned that there is proper resiliency in our networks, and shoving everything in one place is not necessarily a good idea, and wouldn't meet the requirements of some of our companies, for example, who these days their compliance sections are looking very, very carefully at redundancy throughout their networks. That said, the controlling authority, if you like, for what goes down the side of the roads or through the roads is the NRA. And as I mentioned earlier, we haven't yet had a conversation with the NRA because this issue, frankly, as far as we've been concerned, has only come up pretty recently, and we haven't had the opportunity. So I think my takeaway from here is that the authority will certainly be having discussions with the NRA, getting their views on the topic. So it's a little bit of watch this space, I think.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. If you could just join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Taking their time. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Obviously, a quick thank you to the sponsors of the breakout session, Bawden Holdings, Cayman Contractors Association, Electricity Regulatory Authority, DART, KPMG, Phoenix Group, Water Authority, National Roads Authority, and the Departments of Environmental Health and the Ministry of District Admin, Works, Land, and Agriculture. We're going to move on to a coffee break now, which will run till about 3:10, sponsored by Lime, and which we thank them for sponsoring that coffee session as well. So if I could ask everyone to be back in the room by no later than 3:15 for the next session, and obviously immediately following that there'll be a closing, hopefully some brief closing remarks by the Honourable Premier.